Well, welcome again to our next installment, our fourth installment of the Expert Video Series. And I'm here today with my ongoing guest, which is Alan Stransman. Welcome, Alan.
Hey, Matt. Good to see you.
Thanks for coming today. I'm Matt DeYoung, and today we're going to talk about a couple of things. One is an interesting set of a survey that was published, and Alan, you're going to share that with us. And we also want to talk about what that means for the three different emphasis, what people could do with a book, how they could put that out there. So the first thing is, just share with us what you learned, what you kind of saw in this survey, because I think it's really helpful for people thinking about writing a book.
Well, I literally just read earlier today the 2012 Digital Publishing Industry Report that was put out by the Future of Ink, Denise Wakeman and Ellen Britt, and they did an online survey of more than 1,000 entrepreneurs, and asked them how they were using digital publishing and how they plan to use digital publishing in the future. And what kind of jumped out at me was that 86% of the respondents to this survey said that they are planning to publish a digital book in the next 6 months.
Interesting.
Very. And now the top three benefits that they see in digital publishing, the number one benefit is business exposure, followed
Sure.
by increased traffic and then generating qualified leads. But what they're really seeking is exposure. And then the third thing that interested me, and kind of, if you take all of these sort of facts together, paints an interesting picture, is that the number one question among these entrepreneurs was how to get started. So what you have is an overwhelming majority of entrepreneurs who plan to write a book imminently in the next 6 months. They want exposure for themselves or their company, and yet they don't know how to start.
Sure.
So that, to me, leads very much into the question that you and I have talked about. Okay, well, if you're going to write a book, which is one form of, well, that actually is the survey question that we're focused on, not just digital publishing, but actually a digital book. What should be the genre, or what type of book can that be? So that's,
and here's where it gets a little confusing, I think, and you've helped me get a better grasp of this, that there are sort of these different, you call them genres, but it may be different emphasis. And I think that we've talked about there's kind of three major ones, isn't there? So what are those three major emphasis of the types of books someone could write? And for each one, why would they want to have that emphasis?
well, my focus is mostly on what I call an expert book, and I didn't coin that term, but an expert book is the genre that I think is still the most valuable and probably the most common for anybody that is virtually in any business, but certainly service providers, coaches, trainers. In fact, I wrote two versions of a book, one which was called Why Every Speaker Should Have an Expert Book, and then I versioned that for a wider audience, Why Every Speaker, Coach, Consultant, Trainer, and Entrepreneur Should Have an Expert Book.
Right.
So if you consider that the different categories that I included in that title, it's almost everyone.
Right.
I didn't mention retail operators like butchers and
Sure.
spa owners, but they could have an expert book too. So the expert book is a book which positions its author as an expert in his or her field, and I think just about anyone in just about any business can and should write an expert book. However, there are kind of nuances or shadings of that. Memoir is an interesting genre. I've also written two of my own memoirs, and I'm a memoir ghostwriter. Now, memoir, I wrote a business memoir. I mean, I wrote a book about a business, but it was a memoir. It wasn't a how-to. And that kind of a book, I mean, there are books, there's a book about Starbucks, there's many books about actual businesses,
Yeah.
which you think of as a business story or a business bio, if you want to use that term. But you can write a book that's not necessarily about your specific expertise, but about how you created your company. Again, if your number one goal, as cited in this survey, is to get exposure for your business and you have a compelling story to tell, it can be your personal story. And Howard Schultz's story about Starbucks is really his story, but it's also a business story. So these genres do tend to kind of blend. They're not always absolute. So the elements, if we're the three components, is expertise, personal story, and business story. And in various sort of shades or degrees of each, you can put together a book that has more emphasis on one of those elements, if that makes sense to you.
It makes perfect sense. And actually, I'm kind of a visual person, so I always need some sort of metaphor to go along with this. And I like to think of someone like yourself as a writer, and then you have these lens filters. If you've ever seen photographers, they put the UV filter on, or they put the red filter on, Polaroid. And so you have these three filters. It doesn't mean you can't combine them, right, and have all of them kind of working together in a really unique way. But you can also use them, individually. Just really probably depends on what it is the objective is. Like you mentioned, Howard Schultz's book. It's got like a little bit of his story and then him, running the company. So it's sort of his point of view, right? But then there's the Walter Isaacson book about Steve Jobs, and that's entirely about him. There's been a lot of other books written about sort of Apple with him at the helm, but not the whole story of Steve Jobs. So there's the different filters that you can attach depending on what the strategy is. Do you think that's a fair way to summarize it?
Well, from a writer's standpoint, so in your metaphor, I become the camera with the lens on it, and I would see the material or the information provided to me by a prospective client, and I'm speaking from the perspective of a ghostwriter.
Sure.
So I would be the one that would put the lens on and see the story in terms of expertise, in terms of memoir, in terms of business biography, if you will, Matt. But there's also something in the nature of the personality of the subject being photographed, if you will, in our metaphor. And that is, if you are watching this video and you want to get the exposure that they're talking about in this survey, people want their business to be exposed. If you're more comfortable writing the story, or you feel that the story of how you got your business up and all of the obstacles you faced, and it's a really compelling story, or if you have a personal narrative that you feel is more compelling, or if you feel that you have a unique expertise, that will determine which lens I put on my camera. And it doesn't come necessarily or only from me, it comes from the subject. What are you most comfortable with? And I think the takeaway from this discussion, Matt, is that there are options. You don't have to follow a formula. There's not a one-size-fits-all. Get a book out there, get exposure for your business, because everybody else is going to be doing it, and you may as well get in on the action.
Right. I like how you put it, but I want to leave with one really important thing that came up in that survey, and it comes up lots of places, but it's especially prevalent, it sounds like, from the survey here, which is, how do I get started? So is the best way for someone to learn how to get started? I mean, of course, they can go on the internet. I'm sure there's lots of videos. They're watching this video. But, I mean, if someone wants to get in contact with you, what's the best way? And you can probably point them in the right direction about how to get started. What's the best way to get in touch with you?
Well, the best way to get in touch with me is through my website, expertbookcreation.com. And so that's how to make contact with me, expertbookcreation.com.
Okay.
My email is there and my phone number. But the first step in the process is deciding what you want to write about. And that's where I can be helpful. I always use the analogy, Matt, of when I used to teach high school English and university English, and my students would come in and say, I'm having trouble writing my essay. And when I'd say, what is your essay about? They'd say, I don't know. And I don't. That may be why you're having trouble.
That is a clue that you're having trouble, is if you don't know what you're writing about. So that's something that you're good at, and you can pull that out. You before we go, because we got to wrap up, but before we go, what's the name of your memoir? Because I love it and I want you to share it. What's it called? Don't Let Your Dream Business Turn Into a Nightmare. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And it should maybe subtitle and get the right advice along the way. That'll help. So
let me just get the full title. It's Don't Let Your Dream Business Turn Into a Nightmare, a cautionary tale for would-be entrepreneurs.
So you can talk a lot about the startup process. So we'll put the link below in this video in case you want to get in touch with Alan, but hopefully you just even kind of learned a few things today about the different lenses that you can put on a book. Thank you so much for joining me today, Alan, and we'll see you in the next video.
Thank you, Matt. Pleasure as always.
Thank you, Alan.